August 6, 1945, Nagatsuka, Japan, 8:14 a.m. Father Pedro Arrupe knelt in the small chapel of the Jesuit novitiate, his rosary beads clicking softly between his fingers as morning light streamed through the paper screens. The novices, 15 young Japanese men training for priesthood, were preparing breakfast in the nearby kitchen. Outside, cicadas droned in the summer heat. The Ota River flowed peacefully 8 kilometers to the south, where the city of Hiroshima sprawled beneath a cloudless sky. It was an ordinary morning. He had no way of knowing that in exactly 60 seconds, the world would split open. At 8:15 a.m., the sky turned white. A flash brighter than 1,000 suns flooded through the walls, followed by a sound like the earth itself cracking in half. The shockwave hit the novitiate like an invisible fist. Windows exploded inward, roof tiles flew like shrapnel, walls buckled. Arrupe was thrown against the floor, his rosary scattering across the wooden planks. For several seconds, there was only chaos. The roar of collapsing buildings, the screams of novices, dust filling the air like fog. Then silence. He pushed himself up, ears ringing, tasting blood. Through the shattered doorway, he could see a massive column of smoke rising over Hiroshima, mushrooming into the sky with terrible beauty. Something catastrophic had happened, something beyond comprehension. But what was burning toward him through the roads and rice fields would be worse than anything he could imagine. What he did in the next 30 days would save over 200 lives. But to understand why a Spanish Jesuit was in Japan at ground zero and why he chose to stay when death came flooding toward him, you have to go back 7 years, to the day the military police first knocked on his door. Pedro Arrupe had arrived in Japan in 1938 with the naive idealism of a young missionary. He was 31 years old, Spanish, Basque, intelligent. He spoke 5 languages and had studied medicine before entering the Jesuits. He loved the elegance of Japanese culture, the tea ceremonies, the precision of calligraphy, the depth of courtesy. He learned Japanese with the intensity of a man who believed language was the doorway to souls. But the Japan he entered was not the Japan of tea gardens and poetry. It was an empire at war. Militarism had transformed the nation into a machine of conquest. China invaded, Manchuria occupied, dissent crushed, democracy dissolved. The Kempeitai, the military police, prowled the streets hunting for enemies. Communists, spies, anyone who questioned the divine emperor. Christians were watched carefully. Foreign priests were watched even more carefully. And educated foreign Jesuits who spoke multiple languages and traveled frequently. They were watched constantly. The first interrogation came in 1940. 2 Kempeitai officers appeared at the mission house in Tokyo, polite but cold. They wanted to know about his contacts, his correspondence, his travels. They suggested delicately at first that a man of his intelligence might be more than a simple priest. Perhaps he was gathering information for Spain, for the Vatican, for enemies of Japan. Arrupe answered calmly, explaining his mission work, his love for the Japanese people. They smiled, took notes, and left. But their questions had planted a seed of suspicion that would grow into a nightmare. The second interrogation was less polite. The third involved threats. The fourth involved pain. And then, in early 1942, they arrested him. The cell was 3 meters square, concrete walls, no windows, a single bare bulb that burned day and night. They took his glasses, his rosary, his breviary. For 30 days, he sat alone in that box, time dissolving into a gray fog of isolation. The Kempeitai interrogators rotated in shifts, one screaming accusations, another whispering offers of release if he would just confess, a third sitting in silence for hours, watching him with reptilian patience. They were convinced he was a spy. His intelligence, his language skills, his international connections, it all fit too perfectly. The Jesuits, they explained, had always been tools of European powers. He was no different. Confess, they said, and we will be merciful. But confess to what? He had committed no crime. He was a priest, nothing more. A man who had given up medicine, comfort, and homeland to serve God in a land that now saw him as an enemy. In that cell, stripped of everything except his faith, Pedro Arrupe learned what true darkness felt like. Not the darkness of closed eyes or nightfall, but the darkness of human cruelty, of isolation so complete that the mind begins to fold in on itself. He prayed, but the prayers felt like words thrown into a void. He fasted without choice. He waited, not knowing if each day might be his last. What broke, finally, was not his will, but theirs. After 33 days, they released him. No charges, no explanation. Just a curt warning. You are being watched. If you are wise, you will leave Japan. He did not leave. It would have been easy to return to Spain, to safety, to a Europe at war, but at least a familiar war. His superiors would have understood. The Jesuits had lost priests in every conflict, in every persecution. Why sacrifice himself for a nation that saw him as a threat? But Arrupe looked at the small Japanese Catholic community, farmers, teachers, mothers who brought their children to Mass in secret, and saw people who needed a shepherd more than ever. If he left, who would say Mass for them? Who would baptize their children? Who would bury their dead? So he stayed. And the Kempeitai continued watching. From 1942 to 1945, he lived under constant surveillance. His mail was opened, his movements were restricted, neighbors were questioned about his activities. Every Sunday Mass, every confession heard, every sick call made, all of it monitored, all of it suspicious. But he kept working, quietly, carefully, visiting the poor, teaching catechism, preparing young Japanese men for priesthood at the novitiate in Nagatsuka, just outside Hiroshima. The war raged across the Pacific Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and Japan slowly, inexorably, began to lose. American bombers appeared in the skies, cities burned, food became scarce. And still, Arrupe stayed, a foreign priest in an increasingly desperate empire. He had no idea that the 6th of August 1945 would be the day his medical training would matter more than his theology. After the blast, the novitiate stood damaged but not destroyed. Roof torn, walls cracked, but standing one of the few structures for kilometers that had survived, Arrupe checked the novices, cuts, bruises, shock, but alive. Through the shattered windows, he could see the mushroom cloud still rising, a pillar of destruction that seemed to reach heaven itself. And then, through the gates, came the first victims. They walked like ghosts, burned black, skin hanging in sheets, arms extended because any touch brought agony. Their clothes had vaporized. Their hair had burned away. Their faces were masks of raw flesh. They moved in silence, too shocked to scream, eyes wide and empty. Behind them came hundreds more. Arrupe stood in the courtyard, frozen for just one moment. He was a priest, not a doctor. He had abandoned medicine 15 years ago to join the Jesuits. He had no supplies, no equipment, no medicine. The novitiate had bandages for minor injuries, cooking oil, some rice. Nothing for this. But they were dying. Right there, in front of him. He made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "We're going to help them," he told the novices. All of them. What followed was 30 days of hell. They turned the novitiate into a makeshift hospital, tatami mats laid out in rows, every room filled with the burned and dying. Arrupe drew on medical knowledge he thought he had forgotten: how to assess burns, how to prevent infection, how to ease pain when there was no morphine. They used cooking oil to coat burns, torn sheets for bandages, sake for disinfectant, prayer for everything medicine couldn't touch. The victims kept coming, 200, 300, more. They carried them on doors torn from houses, on handcarts, on their backs, children with eyes swollen shut, mothers clutching dead infants, elderly men whose skin fell away at the slightest touch. The novices worked until they collapsed, then rose and worked again. Arrupe moved among them like a man possessed, dressing wounds, offering water, administering last rites to Catholics and non-Catholics alike, because in the face of death, theological distinctions seemed obscene. He worked 20 hours a day, sleeping in brief snatches on the floor beside dying patients. And then, a week later, something strange began happening. People who had seemed to be recovering suddenly fell ill. Their hair fell out. They vomited blood. Purple spots appeared on their skin. They died quickly, horribly, from an invisible killer that Arrupe didn't understand. Radiation sickness. The silent legacy of the atomic bomb. He had no name for it, no way to treat it. He could only watch as people he thought he had saved died anyway, their bodies betrayed by something science had unleashed, but not yet learned to heal. In the darkest moments, 3 a.m, surrounded by the dying, his hands shaking with exhaustion, Arrupe would step outside into the ash-gray night and pray the same prayer he had prayed in that Kempeitai cell 3 years earlier. God, I do not understand this, but I trust you. Use me. It was not a prayer of certainty. It was a prayer of desperation, the cry of a man who had seen too much suffering and could only offer his hands, his presence, his refusal to turn away. Some patients lived, many did not. By September, when the last victims had either recovered or died, over 200 people had passed through the novitiate hospital. How many survived because of Arrupe's care? How many would have died without it? Impossible to measure. But the survivors remembered. They called him the priest of Hiroshima, the foreigner who stayed, the man who didn't run. After the war ended, after Japan's surrender, after the occupation began, Arrupe wrote a detailed account of August 6th. His testimony would become one of the primary eyewitness documents of the atomic bomb. Clinical, precise, devastating. He described the flash, the blast, the burns, the radiation deaths. He documented what he had seen with the careful eye of a trained physician and the sorrowful heart of a priest who had buried too many children. He never expressed bitterness, not toward the Americans who had dropped the bomb, not toward the Japanese who had imprisoned him, not toward God, who had allowed such horror to unfold. Instead, he rebuilt. The Japanese Jesuit mission had been shattered, several priests killed in Hiroshima, churches destroyed, communities scattered, but Arrupe gathered what remained and started again. New churches, new schools, new converts drawn not by arguments but by the memory of a foreign priest who had stayed when the world burned. In 1958, 13 years after the bomb, he was appointed provincial superior of the Jesuits in Japan. In 1965, he was elected superior general of the entire Society of Jesus, the Black Pope, leader of the world's largest religious order. For 18 years, he guided the Jesuits through the turbulent aftermath of Vatican II, pushing the order toward greater engagement with social justice, the poor, the margins. But he never forgot August 6th, 1945. And he never forgot those 33 days in a Kempeitai cell, when he had learned that faith is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to love anyway. Pedro Arrupe died in 1991, at age 83, in Rome. His body lies buried there, far from the ashes of Hiroshima, but his legacy lives in every survivor who remembered the Spanish priest who didn't run, in every Jesuit who followed his example of radical service, in every person who has ever stood at the gates of hell and chosen, despite everything, to walk inside and help. He was not a hero by his own reckoning. Heroes, he once said, are people who do extraordinary things. He had simply done what any priest should do: stay with the dying. But sometimes, staying is the most extraordinary thing of all. Because when the sky turns white and the world splits open, when soldiers come to your door and darkness closes in, the hardest choice is not to run, not to hide, not to save yourself. The hardest choice is to remain, to love, to serve, to trust that even in the deepest darkness, grace can still find a way. Pedro Arrupe made that choice twice, once in a cell, once in the ashes. And because he did, hundreds of people who should have died alone, died held. Hundreds who should have suffered in silence, suffered seen. And one truth became undeniable, that the light which casts the deepest shadows is also the light that reveals what we are truly made of.